brought up North Carolina, and I mentioned Florida. So for those who don't know, at the University of Florida recently, 3 faculty members were set to testify in a lawsuit against the state of Florida regarding basically voter access and voter suppression. Depending on what angle you see it from, you might define it in different ways, but it was related to voter processes of voting and voter registration. The lawsuit basically, in very broad strokes, saying that the state of Florida was suppressing the vote through different policies. And so, anyway, these 3 faculty members wanted to testify, and ultimately the leadership of the University of Florida barred them from testifying in different ways. And so there's a lot that we could talk about there, but actually I'd like to sort of segue into your research here, because one of the things that I found interesting was that one of the loudest critics of this decision and one of the strongest supporters of the faculty's rights to testify against what you could say is a right-wing Republican government of the state of Florida was what many people see as a right-wing campus organization called FIRE. I don't know what FIRE stands for, actually. I can't remember off the top of my head. But they've sort of tried to claim this mantle of valuing civil liberties and free speech no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. And I think although they would be painted as a right-wing group by the media most of the time, and maybe legitimately, I don't know a ton about them, but they were out there defending the faculty members' rights to testify against a right-wing government. And so that just shows you that the narratives about political sides are actually much more complex, I think, than people oftentimes think. And your research recently has been focused on civil rights conservatism, which I think for many people is, as you've put it, I listened to a little bit of your lectures on this, not too much because I actually just want to talk with you about it, but there's been sort of 2 prominent narratives about how the civil rights movement and the new right relate to each other. And it's either outright antagonism, like these 2 could never get along about anything, which the case at Florida recently makes you wonder about. And then there's sort of a co-optation narrative that, I actually don't know how to describe that one as well, so I'll let you maybe dive in a little bit. Ultimately, what you have started to explore in a book that you're writing right now, or struggling to write, as you say,
That's right.
is that neither of those narratives might be as clean as their proponents might want us to think. And so curious to hear, I don't know if that case in your mind connects at all to this, but I sort of made a connection to it as I was reading about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, FIRE, and I'm trying to sit here to remember what the acronym stands for.
I'll look it up real quick.
But they are a really fascinating group. I hadn't actually connected them quite as clearly to some of my own work, which is, more historical. Although I will say that FIRE's not their chief executive person, but one of their kind of high-ranking, I don't know how to put it, members of the organization is a former student of mine, Will Creeley, who I worked with when I was at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, which is the institution that I taught at before I came to Michigan, and tried to bring some of the sensibility of that place, here to my work on the Ann Arbor campus. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people within FIRE who are they're libertarians. They're not necessarily left-leaning or right-leaning, or they could be both or either. So the whole libertarian space, we think of it now as kind of leaning towards the right. That's not true historically. In the 1960s, right. Libertarians were, often leaning towards the left, or they share a lot with anarchists. That, these people who believe, who believe in free speech from a really principled standpoint.
Sure. Noam Chomsky, probably the most famous leftist in our society, describes himself as a libertarian socialist.
That's right. And like lots of ideologies, those can be inflected to the left or to the right as they play out within the context of a social movement or a political cause or a debate or so forth. And so I love and appreciate FIRE because they believe in a deep and authentic way in free speech and what free speech can do for us as a society, and that you should never suppress it. You should just try and constantly create more of it.
Yeah. Create better arguments if you think that.
Better arguments, more arguments, level the playing field so that arguments can be heard. And I think that they're quite different from parts of the contemporary right who have crawled inside of narratives of free speech and have corroded them from the inside out. And have produced a whole generation of young people now who think that free speech is bullshit. That's really unfortunate.
Do you think so this, just as a quick note, it's the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
There we go.
And they, on their website, clearly say nonpartisan, defending your rights, the essential qualities of liberty. And so I don't know a ton about them personally, but just seeing how they acted in this case with UF,
That's right.
I immediately had my sort of bullshit sensor when I saw media describing them as a right-wing group. Not because maybe I don't know about them. I'm not here to say whether they are or they're not, but I think that's really interesting. And okay, so something you just said I want to unpack a little bit, which is, so right-wing groups have jumped into the free speech narrative in ways that might be in some cases disingenuous. And you said it's created this whole generation of people, presumably on the left, who think free speech is bullshit. Do you think that that's a reaction to that posture of the right, of saying this is our mantle now? Or do you think that other people might say that the right has taken up that posture as a reaction to sort of the fact that the left picked up a sort of anti-free speech approach? It's chicken and egg kind of thing? Or?
I mean, I would say that it's and I use this in my own historical work, it's entangled in a way that's really complex. So, I mean, I think, for young leftists, who kind of treat cries for free speech as bullshit, what's really disappointing about that is it's been the left that struggled and bled for free speech, and not just free speech, but the right to dissent.
Yep.
Which is an important right, that we should have this right. It should be constitutionally protected. It should be nurtured. It should certainly be nurtured on the left. And I think that those right-wing groups who have disingenuously tried to claim the mantle of free speech. So, for instance, the moment where Milo Yiannopoulos shows up on the campus at Berkeley and claims the mantle of the Berkeley free speech movement. I mean, that's an obscene gesture, ideologically and politically, and that's that kind of corroding it from the inside out, right? I mean, that's just, all of that was just duplicitous.
And it's showmanship, I think, from
showmanship. And so the same, series of conservative, Republican government, state legislatures who claim to support free speech, but have been enacting bans on protest and dissent.
Right.
I mean, so I think that's what you kind of have to look at. Not only what are people saying, but then what are they doing? Yeah. And how is the right to dissent and to protest in the United States being severely delimited? Protest is being criminalized. Yeah. It's just harder and harder to be able to do it in a sustainable way. By the same people who are, kind of beating the drum of free speech. I mean, we should look at that, right, and kind of think about the complexity of that moment and really bring, some critical thinking skills to bear on things like that.
Yeah. This clip came from a longer episode of the Why Not Me podcast. Find it on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.